back after lunch. It's never fun to be the speaker after lunch. It's better to be the speaker before lunch than the speaker after lunch. Exactly, Anthony. But we have a couple of great speakers here for you to start talking, in this case, looking at data products around this. So first up is Salema Rice. I'm going to introduce both our speakers. They're going to give part of a presentation, then hand over back and forth. So welcome back, everybody on the internet. It's good to see everybody out there. Salema, if you haven't actually seen her name, she's one of the top 30 females that are out there in women in computing?
Women in data.
Women in data. It's even better, right? We like that. So congratulations to that. She's been doing this for 25 years. Very strong mentor, evangelist type of individual, people who we need more of in this industry. Not to say that Anthony's not. He's a sales guy, right? So we know how that works. It's a terrible thing to say about him. Again, it's one of the 30 most inspiring women. That's one of the reasons we put them on after lunch.
Right.
So we'll keep everybody awake, right?
I hope so.
All right. After she finishes, she'll turn it over to Anthony Deighton, who is the Data Products General Manager for Tamr. If you're not familiar with Tamr, they're a local company. It's funny how that works out, time and again, right?
God bless you.
Love that. Anthony has been growing companies for a long time, and that's actually a specialized skill. There are a lot of people that start companies, a lot fewer of them that know how to grow them. So he's been working in this area for well over 30 years at this point. I'm going to give you a couple more. I know your bio's a little bit old on that. But really, the main thing for you guys to know about his background is he was with Click for a long time. And Click in particular has done some wonderful work around data literacy. So Valerie and I have both consumed a lot of the stuff that's come out of Click, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. So Salema, you're going to tell us about getting started with data products, right?
Great, thank you.
Great.
Hi, everyone. And thank you again for the introduction, Peter. Salema Rice, I'm the CEO of CDO Today, but I'm also a 25-year industry tenured Chief Data and Analytics Officer. I'm the former partner and global managing director of Accenture's Applied Intelligence. And, well, I'm just happy to be here today and be and kind of share a voice of the CDO community. I find it fascinating still today that only 27% of the world's largest publicly traded companies have a CDO. And I'm not talking about people like field CDOs or ones in sales or delivery with a title CDO or CDAO, but actual leaders who ultimately have board accountability for your most valuable strategic asset, which is the data. But in my role, I work really closely with dozens of these CDOs, and one very common thing that they will all tell you is as this role continues to evolve, that it's data that really drives digital transformation. You know, it's not technology or communications or automation, AI, or even network, which are all really critical, but it's the way that, you know, this is really, you know, the data is the bloodline, right? It's the bloodline of your digital transformation strategy. It's the way that you're going to future-proof your organization. It's how you will create the workforce of the future. A data-driven digital transformation is how you're going to improve, scale, and get maximum business value. It's how you will overcome cross-functional data fragmentation and create comprehensive insights. It's how your reporting is going to evolve. I loved hearing about Click, you know, from the old rearview mirror to a more proactive, to what happened, to why it happened, and what's going to happen next. Taking your insights from a very descriptive world to a predictive and prescriptive world. Done properly, digital transformation accelerates innovation. It creates a competitive advantage, and it will bring new products to market with remarkable speed and customer engagement. So I myself am a 5th generation CDAO, which I'm sure many of you in this room can relate to. We started as the bailiff, really, enforcing compliance that was to rules that were set by others, such as risk policies. And then we became the lawmaker, defining policies and enforcing compliance. And as we moved into Builder, we were able to create capabilities and become proactive. Now, as the value driver, we led the strategic use of data. We delivered on value-led change and ran the right foundational capabilities. But as the strategic driver, we get to drive organizational data and AI, culture, and data literacy. We see data as a revenue driver, and we get to deliver on AI-powered business. I think we are responsible for really unearthing insights that were previously hidden and managing the data by design and leveraging AI. And well, now I'm actually a strategic advisor, and we'll save that for another session. But for those of you who've been in this role for more than 10 years, you probably remember that this role once existed in financial services only. In financial services, that's where we built policies and standards, and we developed a data strategy. We were able to establish very basic guiding principles back then on how we would treat data as a strategic asset. We collaborated with each other, and I think that is so important today. We developed relationships, many of you who are here today, and we've really developed best practices through our own channels, right? We didn't have a textbook saying, here's the definition of how to be a CDO 20 years ago. We learned from each other. We learned from each other's wins. We learned from each other's losses. And especially as women, women still only make up 22% of all applied intelligence. So for a lot of times, we really depended on leaning on each other. But we've implemented the foundational components of data management, of data quality, and data lineage, and master data, metadata, reference data. But back then when we started, it was really all to address regulatory compliance. Well, I know you're laughing because everyone in here remembers, that's over 40 anyhow, remembers that computer and dot matrix. But seriously, now data is sexy, right? So many of us, including myself, report directly to the president or the CEO of our organizations, or we become the CEO. But today, CDOs actually look very different than we did 20 years ago. We've certainly come a long way from the basement and the afterthought of IT. But what is really driving this evolution? I think, we know, at least for the past 5 years, that culture, not value, technology, or even talent, but culture has been the #1 challenge for today's CDOs. And this is from our MIT CDO survey. And this is actually across all industries. So for starters, when you think about data culture, data literacy, and data products, these are the 3 biggest success factors in our toolkit in making data useful, making it usable, and making it valuable. CDOs today have a unique responsibility and accountability for how the company is going to think about data by being an example, by embracing it, by uncovering opportunities, encouraging innovation, developing your data skills, reducing silos, socializing data as an asset, delivering a competitive advantage, and ensuring its proper use. I believe that you as CDOs are the voice of the data. If data could talk, people would listen, right? If new business and cultural changes that have been put in place over the years have really earned many CDOs a seat at the table. But by productizing and monetizing data, I think people see us as, we actually see data as a revenue opportunity. So finding insights no one else knows and unearthing insights that were previously hidden. In many organizations, the CDOs are driving the organization's strategy. Today's CDOs have a unique opportunity where we get to drive both top and bottom line growth. And then we can ensure that data is the driver and AI is the differentiator. That's another critical success factor. So investing in data products and data skills that will help the company to save money or help the company to grow. I see that we are the change agent. And if you're not the change agent today, you should be, because you lead data, AI, culture, and data literacy. Well, you know, as the evolution grew, so did the landscape, right? And how the landscape changes affects many of us in different ways. The landscape looks very different today. And for some of you like me, many of you that I personally know, your world actually looks a little like this, right? Where you have end-to-end responsibility for data analytics and AI, sometimes directly or indirectly across all functional areas in your organization. But even if it doesn't look exactly like this, I know for certain that your realm of responsibility looks very different today than it did 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, or even 2 months ago before ChatGPT. But what makes this unique, I think, is that it encompasses both the technical and the business. So we can no longer be in a us versus them world. Collaboration, communication, also very critical success factors to becoming data-driven. I think that this can be challenging depending on how long you've been in your role. So where did you come from before you were in this current role? Or what is your current operating, based on your current operating model, this could be difficult to do. And who you report to and where you report within your organization can also make the landscape a bit challenging. But what if you were previously in IT and you owned the processes but not the data? Or what if you came from marketing or risk or even supply chain, as many of you do as this role has continued to evolve, without any technical expertise? What we know now that maybe we didn't know then is that foundation, so the core foundation, is more critical than ever. You can't build a house on sand today. And you certainly can't do it and expect good results. So, you know, we all love banking and financial services for their rock solid basements, right? Like they built these, 20-foot basements that would stand the test of time. The financial services and banking were the first to have a CDO, but sometimes it's very difficult for them to adopt new innovation, even though they have this structure. And the absolute opposite is true for industries like tech and media, where it's difficult to fund those types of foundational initiatives, but it's easy to get funding for innovation and AI, because we all like buzzwords. But data management, if you think about the challenges we have with data management today that we didn't back then, the sheer volume, velocity, and variety of data that we have to deal with today is like a new frontier. We've got to ingest any data from anywhere in any format, and we need to do it fast. So identifying what is the most critical data is also a critical step. We usually don't have the time or the money to boil the ocean, but we have to take a very dual velocity approach when building data products so that we ensure that the data is curated and it's fit for use. Now, back in the day, we would have just simply reverse engineered reports to determine the critical data. But now, critical data is really what data we're using to solve problems, and that's your most critical data. In the data governance space, we've been having a lot of discussions. I've probably had more data governance questions and discussions today than I have at any of these events, because practically overnight, data governance and stewardship has increased in complexity. Accurate, secure, and compliant data, as well as updating and auditing policies and procedures for some of these new AI capabilities, has got to be top of mind for CDOs, especially since there are very limited tools for classifying and governing both structured and unstructured data. And then in the data products, I know Anthony is going to do a deep dive on, on products, so I don't want to steal any of the thunder, but and he'll go into depth here. But one thing I'd like to say about data products is garbage in, garbage out. So because data products are really what's going to enable confident, fact-based decisioning. And let's not forget talent, right? I mean, the inflection point of data and talent and AI is like my love language. But in the talent space, new skills and expertise are what's needed. And so, we've got to be able to attract, we've got to retain, we've got to upskill and develop our top talent. And we need to lead with compassion. Leading with compassion used to be seen as a sign of weakness. Imagine that. But, we need to create, as leaders today, we need to create a culture of experimentation. We need to create an environment of creativity and of critical thinking for the people that are coming on board. We've come a long way in identifying the right skills for the right positions at the right time, but we're just getting started. So I really believe that today's CDOs need to be an entrepreneur and they need to be a problem solver. I think you and your teams should be recognized as the problem solvers within the organization. I used to tell my team all the time that we're just going to get rid of everyone's titles and you're going to be problem solver number 1 and you're going to be problem solver number 2 and so on. But today's CDOs are really focused on delivering business value fast. I'm sure that you've all heard that the average tenure for a CDO today is only 2 years, give or take a few months. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that metric entirely, since about 35% of the CDOs that I work one-on-one with have more than 6 years tenure. But regardless of how long they've been in the role, you need to talk to the outliers. You need to talk to those CDOs who've been in their positions for 5, 10, or even 15 years. There's a theory out there today that a lot of tenured CDOs have, that there's CDOs that thrive and there's CDOs that dive. And they joke about it, but one thing they commonly attribute to those that don't succeed is that you have got to be the change agent. So make sure that you are positioned, no matter where you are sitting in the organization, that you are the company's change agent. I highly recommend a hub and spoke operating model as much and as often as you can. And then make sure that you are positioned to deliver the business value fast. I think that today's CDOs have a unique opportunity to be an example of the art of possible. So I'm going to close with this. Today's CDOs bring a perspective of both data and AI to the conversation. So your company's data strategy really needs to be able to do the same. That starts by including a data product strategy in your roadmap. To have the highest value, these activities should include everything from ideation to deployment to maintenance. Now, one of the biggest challenges facing the next generation CDO is the requirement to have very large amounts of high quality data to operate AI effectively. So curating, collecting, and preparing the necessary data, and then making sure that it is clean and fit for use is going to be a game changer. These data products are really a combination of both data and analytics and AI that are used to solve for a specific problem. In many CDO organizations today, the data teams are building data products with AI in mind, but these products need to be very scalable, very cost efficient, and most importantly, they have to produce accurate intelligence. The fastest way to lose a customer, internal or external, is to lose trust. If they don't trust you and they don't trust your data, there will be more silos than you can imagine. One way that you can ensure your success as a CDO is to produce tangible value with your data analytics and AI. In this way, you will be instrumental in driving the organization's digital transformation and becoming a data-driven industry competitor. With that said, I am going to turn it over to Anthony, and he is going to give you an inside look into how Tamr ensures that its customers have the best-in-class industry standard data products. Anthony?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks, Salema. So the idea here is to spend a little bit of time talking about the changing role of the Chief Data Officer. And if I could over-summarize what Salema shared with us, it's really about moving out of the IT basement and into the boardroom around delivering business value. And probably a theme we've heard a lot today and we'll hear for the next 2 days. And what I want to do is kind of map that change in behavior that we expect out of chief data officers and data organizations into software, right? Because I think as a startup in the Boston area, we're building software that helps people do that. And so we really want to think about how we can support that transition out of thinking about technology and into business value from that perspective. So so we call that idea data products, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time in this presentation walking through the details of what is a data product and sort of how it works, et cetera. But maybe we can step back a little bit and kind of frame out the challenge that we have. And it starts partly a little bit, the introduction. I've spent a lot of time working in the data and analytics space, and I've seen this world change over the last many years. And there's sort of two big levers of change. And the first is, if you can think about it, like the back end of our data infrastructure. So today, storing vast quantities of enterprise data is extremely easy and inexpensive. So it is no longer the case that you have to run your own database, run your own data center. The cloud makes it really, really easy to store large volumes of data very cost effectively. And I think if you roll back in time, there was this vision many years ago that the world was moving to one single data warehouse. I actually began my first consulting project right out of undergrad was with, I probably shouldn't say the client, but with a major retailer headquartered in Chicago at the time. And they had this vision that they were going to put everything in a big Oracle data warehouse. Right? That was the answer. They're going to consolidate everything into one data warehouse. And I'm here to tell you it's never going to happen. It didn't happen there. It didn't happen in any other company since then, and it will never happen in any company in the future. Because there are tons and tons of sources of enterprise data. And as soon as you think you've snapped one of them up, another one pops up over here, or you do an acquisition, or you change your data infrastructure, and it's not going to happen. And part of the reason for that is what I've called Dayton's Law, which I get to make up the name, so that's easy. And it's a derivation of Conway's Law. So is anyone familiar with Conway's Law? We've got a couple people. Conway's Law is the idea that when you build software, the software reflects the organizational structure of the team that built it. So if you have a front-end team and a back-end team, you get front-end software and back-end software. Dayton's Law applies that same concept, but to data. So if you organize your business by product line, you will have data that's organized by product line. If you organize by geography, you'll end up with an EMEA database and a US database. If you do both of those, you'll end up with the cross product of those two structures. And we see this sort of over and over again, that the structure of the enterprise data reflects the structure of the organization. And then when you reorganize, the data itself reorganizes to map to that structure. So the challenge of enterprise data is both a solved problem in the sense that is relatively cost effective, but also a very difficult problem in that the complexity is not going away. On the other end of the spectrum are the front-end tools. This is where I've spent most of my career. And I'm here to tell you that the party is over in the front-end tooling space, right? Everybody has standardized on one of Qlik, Tableau, Power BI, ThoughtSpot. There's a list, right? And you get to pick. And most organizations have standardized on more than one. And that's okay, right? I'm not here to tell you you need to consolidate everything. I guess I should, since having worked for many years at Qlik, tell you if you are going to consolidate, you should definitely consolidate on Qlik. But anyway, the point is, everybody's using one or more or all of these tools, and nobody's going to create another one. And part of the reason for that is the stuff really works wonderfully. If you need to create a bar chart and a line chart and a dashboard or some report or a visualization, the quality of the tooling out there for achieving this is really second to none. It's really easy, it's fun, and everybody's doing it. There are some new consumption endpoints around machine learning and AI, and some really great tooling for doing that. So it's there's a very a rich sort of idea there, and these consumption endpoints have never been more important. If the goal as a CDO is to create enterprise value, getting people their data in the consumption tool of their choice, probably a good way to start. So if you think about, we have these two sides. We've solved the cost-effective storage of large amounts of data, and these consumption endpoints are solid and everybody has one. If these things are true, why is it that nobody in our organization trusts and believes the data that sits in their dashboard? And I mean, it could be a report, it could be your visualization, but go around our organizations and ask them, do you believe this data? Is this data complete? Does this look correct to you? I've yet to meet an organization that says, yep, it's all solved. Inevitably what they say is, well, why are there two copies of Microsoft? I know there's only one Microsoft company. Like, couldn't you see that Microsoft and Microsoft, Incorporated are the same company? Or did you include data from Europe? You didn't? Well, I can't use this dashboard. I need the data from Europe. This phone number is clearly wrong. I've dialed it and it's a busy. So when you dig into the data, it's all a mess. And not for lack of tooling. So as Salema indicated, we as chief data officers and data practitioners, we've begun our career and our work in the basement with the VT100 terminal. We're comfortable with technology. So when we see a problem like I just described, we typically work to solve that problem by grabbing another piece of tech, right? Another piece we can go and implement. And the data management space is rife with new kinds of technology for moving data and transforming data and storing data and adding a bunch of stuff. And I'd like to draw for you an analogy between the state of the world today and the way that enterprise software looked in 1990, which, as it turns out, began when I began my career. And if you wanted to build an enterprise application in 1990, if you wanted to have an application for salespeople, for example, to manage their contacts, opportunities, and accounts, how would you do that in 1990? You'd buy an Oracle database and a 5GL language, and you would build a tool for people to manage accounts, contacts, and opportunities. And along came an entrepreneur innovator in Tom Siebel and eventually Benioff at Salesforce. And they said, that's kind of stupid. We can actually just build that application, and then you can just buy the application from us. People may or may not be aware, but the single largest implementation of an Oracle database is Salesforce.com. So the architecture is exactly the same, right? So it's an application sitting on top of a database. The only difference is that Salesforce took responsibility for building the application. And so part of what I'm suggesting to you is that exactly the same thing is happening in the data management space. Is we're moving away from here's a bunch of tools, knock yourself out, build transformations, you can build pipelines, to what if we could just deliver an application that had the data that you needed to make decisions. And at some level, that's all we're really talking about in a data product. It's changing the conversation away from delivering, deploying tools, and simply to delivering a data application that solves a business problem that's constructed in the context of a business problem that you're trying to answer. And I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. If we do that, or as we do that, it enables a whole set of new use cases that did not appear previously. Just like in the 1990s, by starting to build applications, in the case of CRM applications, or HCM applications, or ERP applications. I guess we need to come up with a 3-letter acronym here. In any case, as we built applications in those spaces that enabled new use cases, the same is true here. So as we build data products that are structured around the domain or the entity, to use that term, of the decisions we need to make, it enables new use cases. For example, allowing people to gain insights into the data, to search the data, to curate and change the data, get feedback from their organization on that data, to use the output of that data in new pipelines, to be able to use machine learning and AI techniques on that data to improve the quality of that data, et cetera. So ultimately, the idea behind a data product strategy is to take a product-oriented approach to the data and then open up a set of new capabilities to solve a whole set of problems. So with that as a little bit of context, since this is Data Products 101, I am responsible for giving you at least some definition of what is a data product. And so that's a little bit, font got a little screwed up there. So my definition, or our definition, of a data product. A data product is a clean and curated, continuously updated set of data that's consumption ready. So there's a couple of really important ideas here. The data product is the best version of a type of data your organization cares about, and I'll come to what that means in a moment, that's been curated by the organization. So people who are knowledgeable and who we trust have looked at this data and provided feedback on it. And it's continuously updating as new data enters your organization. And it's focused on consumption endpoints. So the idea is not to think about governing or managing sources of data, but really to change the conversation and start focusing our energy on the other side. How is this data being used? And focusing our energy there. So it needs to be curated with feedback from the users of that data. There needs to be a mechanism for users of this data to give feedback into that. It needs to provide both human interfaces, so I can literally see the data, and machine interfaces, so the machines can read the data, obviously, since typically this data goes into other use cases. It has to be aligned around a domain-specific schema. So this is, the next slide will kind of work through that in a little bit more detail. The idea here is this isn't just random sets of data, but it's data about your customers, data about your suppliers, about your parts, about your products, about your components. It could be about locations, employees. It's a domain that matters to your organization. It's also enriched with reference data. So the best version of data in your organization almost certainly doesn't come from your organization. It almost certainly comes from outside your organization. You need only think about an address for one of your key suppliers. Right? The best address for that key supplier is probably located on the website for that supplier, or from D&B if you use D&B data, or so you didn't actually create that data. It's available outside. It needs to be validated and standardized based on global standards. So if we have country codes, that long, these sorts of things, these are global standards. We can use those. It needs to be version controlled and monitored. So the one thing we can say for any clean, curated copy of data is that tomorrow it's going to be a little bit better, or at minimum a little bit different, but hopefully a little bit better, right? Because every day we're working to make that data better. And if you're familiar with Tamr coming out of the machine learning space, there's an opportunity to think about how we can use the machine to do a lot of this work on our behalf. So rather than thinking about hand curating every one of these data products, if we can think about how we could train a machine to do that on our behalf, that's how we can actually make these data products scalable. So I've sort of alluded to this a few times. To make this a little bit more specific, the idea of a data product is interesting in the abstract, but is really only relevant when it's centered around a specific domain. So where, the most obvious domain where most organizations are beginning their data product journey is around customer data. Right? That is sort of the obvious place to go start. Last I checked, most running businesses, other than those from Silicon Valley based on venture capital, have customers. Right? So if you don't have customers, you're probably not a business. So it's probably a good place to start. If you're thinking about a data product strategy, start with your customer data. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds of customers in the world. You can sell to businesses, you can sell to people. So thinking about B2B and B2C customers is a great place to start from a data products perspective. The next domain that we often see customers sort of thinking about and working on is suppliers, right? Because in today's economy with global supply chain risks and disruptions, understanding your supplier base and where you have supply chain risk, especially when you think globally, or again, going back to Dayton's law, thinking about that cutting across product lines or thinking about that cutting across geographies, you want to be thinking about your supplier base in a holistic fashion. But then you can start thinking about these in industry-specific ways. So thinking about something like patients, if you're in the healthcare industry, or healthcare providers, if you're a payer. These are really important domains that we see a lot of uptake in. And then another great example is this idea of market data linkage in financial services. So thinking about what is my investable universe? Who are all the public and private companies that I could be investing in? And the point here is these are 6 probably useful examples, probably one of the more popular examples. But if we sat with a whiteboard, which of course we don't have, and brainstormed for a few minutes, we could almost certainly come up with several hundred different domains. And not knowing exactly what industry everybody's in, you'd almost certainly think about it in the context of your industry. So if you're in the oil and gas industry, you'd be thinking about wells and wellheads and well bores, and you'd be thinking about measurements and other domains. And if you're in a different industry, you'd be thinking about the domains that are relevant to you. But the important idea here is that the data product strategy needs to start with this domain that matters to you as a business and extend back from that consumption endpoint into how you would build that data. So in lieu of a live demo, I thought I would show you how this might manifest itself. How would you view and experience this in a very practical and tactile sense? And one way to think about data products is as an app store for data. And the analogy here is not like, is very literal. I literally mean in the same way that with my phone, I have a store with a bunch of applications on it that I can install on the phone and that then do something functional and useful for me. We could think about a data product strategy and a data products as very similar, that there should be a library of these data products available to me. I select one, I install it in my enterprise, it does something useful out of the box. And when I've built up my data product interface for my organization, a user who showed up at that, showed up to that site would see something not unlike this, which is a set of tiles. Each tile represents the data product for a domain inside that organization. So it could be my customer data, my supplier data, my parts data, et cetera. And so again, it's a little bit of a small, but you might show on that tile how that data has changed over time, how more sources have been added to it, new attributes have showed up, that the quality of the data has improved, we've added additional feedback into it. And one would expect that when you came here to look at these data products, that they would be like blinking as new data, that they would be changing continuously. And again, these are consumption oriented. So the view of this data says nothing about where that data came from. It speaks to how I might use it to make better decisions. So the idea here is this data product interface is a single view of all the key entities that matter to you as an organization, and it becomes your jumping off point for achieving the goal Salema started us with, which is how do I add value in the organization? Start making decisions with this data. Where's the best data we have on customers? Go here, it's right here. Once you drilled into one of those tiles, what you'd be presented with is something that looks like maybe quasi spreadsheet. Here is literally all of the data that we know about that specific domain, and the example as customers. Right? And this would give you a place to interact with that entity's worth of data, where you could see things like, well, what records have changed recently? Which records have new attributes? Which records have been improved recently? So we've seen a shift in the underlying data, and that's added a bunch of new attributes. It's filled some gaps in, and now I can see that. And it would provide you an interface to start working with that data. So you might get a URL where you could use that in one of your visualization or machine learning platforms. And it provides you a mechanism of providing feedback. So in the example I provided earlier, where I looked at the dashboard and saw 2 copies of Microsoft, in this context, I'd be able to say, that's not true. That should be the same record, and that feedback would go back into the system for a curator to go and fix that data. And then lastly, when I drilled down on a specific example of, in this case, a customer, I'd be presented with the consolidated view of our organization's best knowledge about, in this case, what is that, A&A Fire and Safety Company. So this customer, this specific entity. And again, the idea here is that if I want to know across all of the product divisions, all of the geographic splits we have, all of the databases that we store as an organization, what's the best version of this data, or this best version of this customer information we have, it would be available here. And this would also allow you to roll up the organizational knowledge graph behind this entity. So you'd be able to see which users have provided feedback on this entity, which users have updated this entity, which users own, as it were, the relationship across the sources. What sources comprise this entity? Did this entity data come from our EMEA database, or did it come from our Snowflake instance that we're running in California? That all would be available right here. And again, this would provide you an opportunity to update, change, provide feedback on this data. And again, to be clear, this doesn't mean you're going in here and editing the data in the underlying Oracle database, but you're simply providing feedback into the system to say, I think this data is wrong, and then a person responsible for that data would be responsible for triaging that feedback into the system. So again, the important idea here is, while we might talk at a theoretical level about what is a data product, they actually have very specific manifestations in how they are experienced in the software. So you can go in, you can see this information, you can take action on it. So connecting a little bit back to where Salema started us, which is how are the role of the chief data officer changing. Again, our approach to how we solve these problems also needs to change. And again, drawing back to my 1990s Oracle database 5GL analogy for a minute, the idea that we would build an application from scratch in 1990 made perfect sense. You would budget yourself 2 or 3 years for that development effort. That was not considered unreasonable. And then along comes, say, Siebel and Salesforce, and says you can just sort of implement this. Similarly, we're seeing that same shift in the data space. So traditionally, and I think part of the reason that CDOs have seen themselves as technologists and been in the IT basement is because they viewed their superpower as implementing technology. Implementing technology related to data, yes, but that's really their superpower. It's how to implement technology. And so the idea here is that these were typically long projects that had large upfront investments. They needed to partner tightly with IT because they were largely mediated by the technology. And they were really focused on this question of the tech for delivering data as opposed to the data itself. Our view is that if you move to a data product strategy, you can shift that conversation to more like, how do I deploy an application versus how do I build it from scratch? And so that means that these projects are much faster. They're focused on business value, so it's focused on delivering a specific domain. They are typically much less expensive because there's tremendous leverage in a central organization building that application and then allowing everyone to use it. And it's focused on the domain expertise of that specific entity. I also believe that they allow for a much more leveraged approach to using AI and machine learning techniques. So the idea that we could actually have a machine looking at all of our data, consolidating that data, and rolling it up into a data product requires that we have we've invented a machine-driven probabilistic approach to that challenge. And otherwise, we're building from first principles. So to leave you with a couple of sort of practical takeaways, and then we can do some Q&A. So as you think about building a data product strategy, think a little bit about starting with, it says know your why. Start with your domain or use case first. So rather than thinking about it from the perspective of your sources first, like where's my data starting from, think about the consumption endpoint first. I sort of suggested as a hack, you probably should start with customer data. But and generally speaking, that is a good strategy, but it's not always the best strategy. There are many organizations that have a different domain that's more relevant and more directly connected to business value. Think about it from the perspective of the data, your organization, your tech stack. So what are the, if you haven't moved data to the cloud, this is a great driver for thinking about that. Starting with the use case. So if you think about the domain as customer, think about the use case as cross-sell and upsell. So what is the business problem you're trying to solve with that domain? And that's the mechanism that you can use to secure budget and buy-in, because now you're connecting directly to business value. And then last but not least, thinking about the MVDP, the minimum viable data product, think about this in the context of what's the minimum I need to do to connect these set of sources to a business problem I have, cross-sell and upsell, back to a domain, customers, and what's the least I need to do to get that up and running quickly. This also introduces a concept that you might consider using in your organization, and I've seen rolled out in quite a few organizations, this idea of the data product manager. And the thread here, I'm trying to make it very obvious. The linkage between data product manager and product manager is very clear. So you're really taking a product style approach to the challenge of managing data. And many of the same concepts literally apply one-to-one. So data product managers think about owning the vision of the data product. They act as a bridge between the consumer of that data, the business, and the developer of that data, data scientist, right? And they translate the needs and requirements of those business people into what changes need to happen at the data level. They also can often be process managers, so thinking about the cycle times, how we make changes in that data, how we drive those changes through, how we test them, make sure that they're better, et cetera. So what we've seen in many leading organizations is starting with a data product strategy and then thinking about how to build the organizational scaffolding to support that, and data product managers can be a great tool for doing that. So we're going to build software to support that. The idea behind Tamr is to build a kind of a platform, an engine for developing data products and making them available. Our view is that if you go back to where I started with what are the requirements of a data product, we need to have in the platform a whole set of features that support exactly that set of capabilities. So it needs to have a pre-trained model. It needs to have rules for record consolidation. It needs to loop in third-party sources for enrichment. It has all the necessary data quality services, and it's built on top of an industry-specific schema. I would have done a demo, but they don't have an HDMI cord up here, but it would have been very similar to the screenshots you saw earlier. So with that, definitely open to some Q&A and an open conversation.
Be really daring, so they don't toss it to me, right?
Yeah, right. You don't want me
Thank
to.
you guys both for a great presentation and for keeping everybody awake. That's always a good thing, right? One of the things I noticed is that there were a lot of people taking pictures of your slides. Is there another way you can make them available even sooner than the conference will be making them available?
Yeah,
I guess you have a
absolutely.
bunch of people around in data nerds t-shirts, for example.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
why not?
if you go to the booth and drop a card, or you can give this to me after the presentation, I'm happy to email them. We can do USB drives if we like that. I can print them out on paper. Actually, I probably can't print them out on paper, but.
We want to make it easy for you to take knowledge away. So with that, questions for our two speakers, please. We'll go here, and then I'll come back to you.
Hi, great presentation. When I go back, right, when we see data marts, when we see semantic layer, right, I did see a difference between traditional and data product. What do you see in terms of a difference between a data mart and a data product?
Yeah, so the challenge with a data mart, there's nothing inherently wrong with a data mart. A data mart is simply a storage or persistence layer for a cut or a view of the data. But I think it's sort of like, well, it's like a USB drive. Right? It's a really good tool if you want to just quickly store something. But it's not really thinking about the end-to-end process of how to manage that data from a variety of sources and into a consumption endpoint. Or to overuse to overextend the analogy, what Dropbox is different than a USB drive. So Dropbox provides a full framework for moving files from local storage into a place I can share it, and a USB drive is a recipe for disaster in terms of losing files and things like that. So I think of the data mart as the USB drive and a data product strategy as Dropbox, as a full framework. And so things like, how do I govern change in that data mart? How do I think about getting feedback into the data? How do I add a new source to that data mart without having to rebuild the whole thing? How do I think about evaluating the quality of the data in that data mart? These are not things the data mart knows or cares about. It's just a storage spot. And so it's a good example of an intermediate point as we make this evolution. It's a good idea and very common. We see organizations. By the way, the most common data mart is Excel, right? Like I just need the data, give it to me in Excel. Right? That's the behavior. That's like the floppy disk before the USB drive, I guess, to use my analogy. But so it's not evil or wrong. It's just an intermediate point on a journey.
It's interesting. I'll just add quickly to that. When I was Global Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Allegis, our first data product wasn't customer, it was candidate.
Yep, perfect example.
Right? Because it changed so often and with so many varieties of different types of data with skills and applicants versus candidates versus, so good stuff.
If I can over-summarize their talk, initially, Selena said, you can have everybody try to do data, or you can put a specialist in charge, right?
Right.
You can have a big box of data, or you can make it into something that people can manage more appropriately.
That's right.
So again, I'm oversimplifying, but please.
Now, a quick question. We've been working on implementing data products within Department of Navy and have seen some very quick successes, which is awesome. We're also seeing some challenges of what is the right size to scale your data product? Do you have any hints or tips about keeping it from being a 6-year endeavor instead of a 6-week to 6-month endeavor?
Sure. Do you want to?
No.
So I think we had that sort of checklist. So a lot of the similar tips and tricks that you might do for product development are very relevant to data product development. So the common mistake in product development is to sort of spend too long gathering requirements, over-engineer the solution, spend a long time building before you get user feedback. We sort of intuitively know these things, and many of us have even experienced them. And then we go ahead and we work on data products, and we do exactly the same things, right? So we should think about learning from those product development mistakes as when we go to build data products. Now, I should be a little careful here and say, when it comes to data product development, I think part of the reason that we see things taking a long time and some of the things you indicated, is because there isn't sufficient tooling to make building data products easy. If you think about product development, we have Jira, we have GitHub, and we have a lot of tooling to support best practices in agile software development. A lot of that tooling doesn't exist as it relates to data product development. Full disclosure, I'm about to go into sales and advertising mode, but that's exactly what Tamr is trying to go do. So our idea is, what if we could build the tooling necessary to support data product development in the same way that we've seen it for software development. And the only subtle shift today versus 10, 20 years ago is that we have the benefit of machine learning and artificial intelligence to make that really easy. The great thing about data is it's typically well structured and easy for machines to read and understand, whereas MRDs and requirements documents typically are not. Although interestingly, with large language models, we may see that change, but that's a whole nother talk. We can do it at a different time. The point is that we can take advantage of the fact that the data is readable, and we can actually have the machine do a lot of the work that we would traditionally look to developers to do. But that's a side
I think that MVDP that he talked about too is really important, right? Like getting a data product into their hands fast, that's usable and scalable and provides value. You can tell a story by over communicating about how much better it's going to get, right? Like in the same way that our initial candidate, eventually became the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? But on day one, it did not look like that. But I think bringing them along with you is really important.
Data products are built based on the users who you're targeting. Many times the users will tell you what they need, and tomorrow it'll be new data request, and day after tomorrow. So there's a known data request, and there are things that are ad hoc that keeps growing. How do you manage that in your data product lifecycle?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to push back a little bit on the premise. So you're absolutely right that if you ask a user, what question do you have today? They will say, here's my question, and then you'll formulate that into data and deliver them the data. And of course, tomorrow the question has changed because presumably they've answered the first question, they're on to the next question, right? And the reason that
that's a good thing.
The failure point here is that we're focusing it on the question and not the domain. Yeah. So if you're if this user is asking a lot of questions about customers, just to use my prior example, then the data product strategy is to think about that term of art entity, think about that domain that they care about, customers, and provide all of the best data for them to answer questions in that domain, and then give them the best tooling to do that. That best tooling might be Excel, it might be Power BI, it might be Click, it should be Click, biased, whatever. It should be some great tool that you can use to go and answer questions on that. And maybe more than one of those. So if they're building models on it, then it probably needs to be a machine learning platform. If they're, doing Excel-like things, they probably need Excel. But now you've abstracted away from that domain. And now you can start evaluating the questions that the users are asking. And I ask the question, do we have the right data in this domain? Do we need to augment this data with other enrichment sources? Is the quality, they're doing analysis of phone numbers, but all the phone numbers are wrong. Well, maybe we should go fix the quality of that column because that column's crappy and we should go focus energy there. And now you've changed the conversation away from delivering data, like requests, to improving the quality of that domain so that we can serve those business questions. And that's precisely the idea of the data product strategy, is to get out of dumps of data, like one-off requests, and to governing and managing a domain that allows people to use whatever tool they would like, or whatever tool is appropriate for the kinds of questions they're answering. So it is a fundamentally different, it's a shift in strategy which enables the outcome that you're looking for. Yeah.
A follow-up question would be, looking at data scientists. I know Salema talked about, hub and spoke. I mean, data science scientists basically work really well in hub and spoke, but their data needs are quite different than your regular users' needs, and most likely it is they're going to need across many data products. So, do you point the data scientist to data products, or do you point them to something else?
So depends a little bit on how one defines a data scientist or data engineer, and they often get mixed up. So data scientists are typically people who are building models, and then I think that the framework I described earlier works perfectly. So you have a domain, they can build models off the domain. Often you're right, they're working across domains, but that just means you need two domains and a key relationship between them, so it doesn't change the answer particularly. It does suggest you may need multiple data products, and that's very typical. Many organizations have customers, partners, suppliers, parts, orders, I mean, you can, right, and then you think about cross-entity linkages. Data engineers are a different bird. And data engineers are the kinds of people who are thinking about engineering the underlying pipelines of these data products. That's a little bit of a different answer. So, and typically they are working on building the structures of those data products as opposed to consuming the output. The analogy would be they are the engineers in a product development organization, whereas the data scientists maybe are your elite users, the one, I've lost the word, but the people who use your product the most.
It was a game changer in my organization. Honestly, I think the data scientists used to say that they spent 85% of their time trying to wrangle data, right? And 15% of their time doing what they were really hired to do. So being able to have curated and clean data that they trusted and that we trusted was, I mean, we were able to produce AI products and products, both internal and external, at a speed that we'd never been able to do before.
That's actually a really important point. Imagine what your data scientists could do if they could start with the best version of customer data that you had. They would spend a lot less time trying to figure out how to map two tables together, right? That'd be great.
In my organization too, a lot of it was third-party data, right? I mean, like it wasn't bad enough having to wrangle our own data, but bringing in third-party data, was another challenge. And some of those things that we tried to do, some of them took years, right? Like old master data, like we don't want to talk about that, right? I mean, years sometimes. But now we can do MBDPs in 6 weeks or less.
Speed is something everybody likes. We're technically over time here, and we're into break, but I'm sure our panelists would still like to hear some questions. So go ahead, unless you all need to move on time.
Please, if you want to get a break, go guys take a break.
Yeah, don't miss this question, guys. So I'm coming from consulting the federal government.
Yeah.
Work for Booz Allen, and then we are developing a.
It's a guy in the Navy in the back.
Yeah. Yeah, I met him before. He's a CDO. So we are adapting this product, data product. We represent. I mean, our consulting is mostly on the IT side, the data engineering. So we adapted. Say we are going to build data products. Ultimately, the end users are going to be the business users. So their mentality is still with data mart, Excel spreadsheets, and a couple of Tableau reports or whatever, right? So how do you make them adapt to this? I mean, at least in the federal government area, there is a huge wall of between the business and IT, the way it works. So the culture, how do you address the culture to adapt to this product methodology? Do you?
Well, I can speak from my experience. It starts from the top down, utilizing it, right? So when we created an ESG model, and the CEO brings the model in her application to the board meeting now. No more paper, right? Like reducing the documents coming into the boardroom saying, I'm going to use it, therefore you're going to use it, right? Like, so, and each persona had a different view from within the tool, from within the actual application. And what was driving the application was a particular, data product that we used specifically around ESG and how ESG was impacting our organization. So I think that it starts, like, it's part of that culture. It's part of data literacy. It's part of not just the data product itself, but the applications that are utilizing that data product. And then that's kind of how you over-communicate in some ways, how it's being used, the value that it's being used throughout the organization, the things we can do faster, the things we can do more efficiently.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I would add, you have two conversations, an IT conversation and a consumption end user conversation. The simple way is to start with the consumption conversation. Our tendency is to start with the IT conversation, probably because where we came from, what we're comfortable with, And the hard conversation is how are you going to use this data,
Right.
especially in the government. And so, but forcing, as a consultant especially from the outside, forcing organizations to start the conversation there is going to lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, we are working on creating that MVDP. Nice
Yes.
name, not
Yes.
MVP anymore, MVDP.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
stuff.
Enjoy the rest
Thank
of the
you.
conference.
Anthony
you,
and
guys.
Salema, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to urge you guys to do one more thing. If you're out there standing around and you see somebody you don't know, walk up and say hi. We're all here in the same place with the same